will be discussing about boosting your international communication, how you can build successful, effective campaigns with the Glocalities values database. And please use the chat box on the top bar. You need to see it right next to people. So you don't need to wait until the end of the session to ask your questions. Please, you can use it anytime, and we'll be stopping from some time to time to answer your questions. We want this session to be an interactive one. And
indeed,
yeah,
it's also more fun for us. So just ask your questions right through it. It makes it a bit more dynamic and easier.
Exactly. And today's speakers are Pieter Verheggen, the CEO of Glocalities, and Martin Schiere, Principal Marketing Strategy Consultant of Glocalities. So I'll start sharing my screen for the slides, and I'll leave stage to Pieter.
Thank you, Melis. Well, also welcome from my side. We are happy to have you with us. We're also happy to be able to do this webinar because we are now, since 2018, we're up and running. And now we have also showcases which we can show you how we work with Glocalities, and how we can boost the effectivity of your international communication with Glocalities. I think all of you know that we are looking for cross-cultural differences between countries and within countries. And one of the topics is the importance of those both elements within international communication. So what we will do, and on the next sheet is the agenda for the next hour. First, we will show you a little bit between the difference between markets and within them, how important cross-cultural information is to set up your communication, to international communication, and how you can deal with it. How you can use it in marketing and management. And as I said, we are now 4 years underway, and we have 2 good examples how we helped our clients from Big Green Egg. Probably you know it, the barbecue brand from the United States who came to Europe a few years ago, and our own, between brackets, Dutch Flower Council, how we helped them to improve their international communication strategy within Europe. So that's it. We are happy if at the end we will have taught you 5 things. First, that it's important to separate out the cultural specific norms and values and elements from the universal. Martin will go in later on deeper into universal trends and how important it is compared to cross-cultural differences. And also when it is important to look at those cultures and values because it drives target audiences and how you can use it. And of course, when you use those kind of information and the communication board comes with an advertising campaign or communication setup, it still is important to test it. But remember, and I hope that will be the takeout for today, that difference within markets are as important as between markets. Why is this so important? Well, one of our colleagues in research, Ipsos, did an interesting study, and they found out that ad performance, as they call it, travels in only 31% of the cases on average on an international level. What does it mean? It means that in fact, if you look at the effectiveness of international campaigns, only 30% of what is set up as an international campaign travels in different markets and over different borders. This means that 7 out of 10 international campaigns do not take care of the national or cultural differences and are not delivering the message or not delivering the outcomes that is needed to delivering the story of the campaign. That means that only 30% is effective. At Glocalities, we try to boost that percentage with Glocalities, with the knowledge about norms and values and the cultural differences. We think that you will be able to set up better international campaigns that take into account the cultural differences, not only between markets, but also within markets. And if we look for the next slide, we can also explain why this is so important. Nana Bos, one of our first clients of Glocalities, said it very clearly. The purpose is to identify what binds markets together with regard to a brand and what sets them apart. And in all the research we have done so far, we see that there is a kind of range where it goes more easy and when it is more difficult. The more we want to communicate functions or product attributed aspects, it is more easy to bring it on an international level. But the more lifestyle, values, and tone of voice is involved, the more difficult it is becomes, and more knowledge is needed to understand what's going on in different markets and within different target audiences.
So,
go on,
yeah,
Martin.
Yeah, so this is relevant for when you build your campaign. So if you want to build your campaigns and you know absolutely nothing about cultural differences, just purely focus on the function. It is an app that works well. It's a running shoe that makes you run faster or that protects your knees. So if you have no knowledge at all, just of cultural differences, just focus as much on the function as possible, because then there is less chance of being wrong.
Even you can see that there is a difference in industry and branches. Service industries have a more easy job to go than, for example, food and drink industry. This morning I got an advertising campaign from American Express, and probably you have seen it as well, that gives a discount on all international airports. A pure functional service-oriented advertising campaign. They're running it probably everywhere around the world. While on the other hand, we see Heineken, for example, on the previous slide. Their message is much more needed to be tailored to cultural differences compared to different audiences around the world. It proves that there is a huge range where it comes more easy and where it's more easy to use to a more difficult. And if we go to the next slide, a good example of an industry is the vegetarian food industry. All over the world, the need for more vegetarian food is increasing. But from the studies we've done so far, we see that there are so many different aspects, cross-cultural related aspects that need to be addressed in different parts of the world to bring across the message of a vegetarian brand or product to that market. For example, in some countries, there is a much more religious aspect linked to the vegetarian food, while in other countries or other markets, it's totally absent. Animal friendliness is considered in some cultures different compared to other cultures. The same, the perception of healthy and healthiness is not around the world the same. And to the end, environmentally friendliness, we see that in different parts of the world, it is perceived totally different than in other parts. This means that to be able to start an international campaign, an international advertising campaign, it's very important to have a knowledge about the cross-cultural differences, to know what in that market is available, what is running in that market, and to use that knowledge to build your communication campaign. And I think from this point, I hand it over to Martin to show us how we can use it and why it is so important. Martin, to you.
Super. Melis, would you click one more time on the button? Well, next slide. And click one more time. So that, because then the words appear at the bottom.
Can you see it now, Martin?
No, but it's fine. I'll explain. So yes, now we can see it. So
okay, perfect.
Everybody's always focused on, let's say, on the results, on what you get out of it, on the real behavior, on the social demographics, on the issues, and on who you're focusing on what. But to make communications effective, you must really understand why, to make sure that communication resonates with the target audience. And then you have to look at values, cultures, aspirations, and emotions, everything that's hidden. So our job is to get the stuff that's on the ground visible. And not only visible, but quantified. Because once you can quantify it, you can compare it. Is my market really different from the other market? And how is this different? And in the next slide, we'll show you how. This is, for example, an example here. So this is the brand attribute innovation. And you see here the popularity of the brand attribute innovation. So this doesn't mean that some brands are more successful using innovation in other markets. No, it's how this brand attribute as a value travels across markets. And you see here that in some markets, the value innovation is much more appreciated in other markets. And markets that are, for instance, very innovation driven, think about the US, think about the UK, it doesn't mean that the values that products and a brand should be innovation driven. In fact, in many of these markets, people look with a very critical eye at technology. Think about Facebook, all the scandals that are happening here, the influences of democracy, the influences of jobs, of algorithms. So here you see in many markets that people are starting to become very reticent about technology. And this also means how you use it in branding. And as you see here, the Netherlands is an orange dot here. We are famously skeptical of everything that has a positive message. So there you have to be very careful. But also in markets such as Japan, where innovation is very much driven in society, but not as a brand value of how you do it. And how you see here is the linking between a brand value and how people look at technology. So how people are, so the consumer value with the brand value. And you see how this differs. So understanding how these values travel across markets is crucial. And this is just one example, but we literally have hundreds of examples of how different values travel across markets. And once you know which markets you want to enter or you want to focus on, you can see which values should I use in my brand positioning, or which values should I communicate in my brief to the agency. Next slide, please. This is a brief explainer. Now, this is our segmentation. You can build your own segmentation. There are many other segmentations to build, but they will have fundamentally the same ideas in it. So this is segmentation based on a psychological axis and a sociological axis. We have belong and explore and control and freedom. And these 5 segments that come out, the creatives, the challengers, the achievers, the conservatives, the socializers, you'll find them everywhere in the world, but in different sizes. The creatives, for instance, the open-minded idealists who adhere to self-development and culture. This is massively big in Northwestern Europe, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Sweden, but also on the both coasts of the US. Think about California, think about Boston. That's where they're very big. In the US, in general, it's about 23% of the population. They were the challengers, and that's another part of the US that's important. So this is the work hard, play hard, the careerist, the adventurous part of society. This is approximately 20% larger in the US across markets. Also in Asia, they're very big. The achievers, think of Mitt Romney, so the old Republicans. They are, let's say, on one hand, very much IT driven, very venture capital driven, pro-business driven, but with a more conservative value set. And they are very large in the US, but even larger in markets such as China, in the Middle East, they're very big. And socializers, they're hardly present in Asia. They are small. There are some markets that are bigger, but this is something very Northwestern European orientated. And creators, for instance, they're still 23% of the Japanese population. So here you already start seeing that these value patterns you'll find in all markets. And this already suggests that these differences within each market, if they are there, they will be bigger. And we'll prove that with the next slide.
Martin, may I ask one question? Because I know that many of our listeners would like to know, if we go back to that slide, is this a static thing, or how is this evolving in time? Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is a super good question. So your values get formed between like 16 and 20% when you're 22 years, depending on which culture you are. And those values stay with you your whole life. And that's why you have, for instance, post-materialists that are in their 60s, in the 70s, think of baby boomers, that are more liberal than the generation that comes after this. Think, for instance, as DeSantis or new conservative movements in the US. So you see that this is actually very stable. However, it does change over time slightly. So every year it changes a bit. And there's a general shift from belong to explore. So generation-wise, so each generation is a bit more explore-orientated than a previous generation, although mind you, when you look at generation, difference within each generation is bigger than the difference between generations. So I prefer not looking at generations, but still there is a difference. And also in society in general, it moves. So also in Asia, where we think there's an Asian value set and it's all set and it's different than Western value set, we see this shift. So first answer, it's quite stable. It changes a little bit over time from belong to explore.
Thank you.
And here, so this is to look at the differences between markets. Now, this is not just one slide. We literally have hundreds of these statements that are related to values or trends. Here, consumers that focus on healthy ingredients such as protein and vitamins. Now, we see 4 markets here. That's the US, the Netherlands, Australia, which is right behind the US market, and the UK. And you see, yes, there is a cultural difference. Of course, you have to adjust your market according to this difference. But within each market, the difference is bigger than between the markets. In each market, let's say the challengers are more, let's say, less open to this, or more less focused on this. And the socializers are also less focused. And on the other side, the creatives are more focused on this. So in each market, you see, 1, that the difference is bigger, and 2, that the patterns are more or less simpler. There are some small changes per market, but the patterns are similar. And we can go over this several times. And in the next slide, it will become even stronger. So here, now, you can argue that, because that was the counter reply that I had, is that, well, these markets are quite similar in socio-cultural context, but these markets are really different. We took Brazil, US, Netherlands, and China. And this is the openness to explore new things. And that you see in many of the cases, in this particular dimension, the openness to explore new things, the differences within the markets are different than these massive differences. In the US, there's a big difference. In the Netherlands, which were a very small country, this is hugely different. This is also part of, let's say, the slightly becoming part of the Dutch version of the culture wars. That is the openness to explore new things. In Brazil, which is a very heterogeneous country, on this particular axis, they are very homogeneous. So openness to new things is actually a very Brazilian thing. It's part of their modern contemporary culture. And you also see that they are open people in general, regardless of their value sets. And in China, the difference is even bigger, but that's because of this large social cultural change taking place in Chinese society. Now, Chinese leadership likes to focus on how Asian values are different, how they are very stable, etc., which is true. But the underlying change is bigger, and the underlying change in Asia is bigger than in Europe. So not only, let's say, the differences between the groups, but also in time-wise, it moves faster. Okay, is everything clear till now? Are we going too fast?
I think you're going fine.
Yeah.
One of the questions,
fine, Martin. Thank you.
One of the things we see here, Martin, as well, is that it seems that, like in all 5 countries, all 4 countries, the socializers and the conservatives are lagging behind to explore new things.
Yes.
Do you see that as a trend over all different categories, or is that category specific? Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's because these value patterns are similar in these different countries, and that is how we based our segmentation, because it just works. But if you would build another segmentation, you would see the same value patterns. And what you see here, that consumer groups that are more conservative are almost by definition less open to exploration. So that's why they're lacking. But also the socializers, which is more the let's say the entertainment driven, the family and friends driven, the part of society, opera watching, movie watching part of society, the live and let live part of society, the happy part but don't bother me 2 part society, they're also less open. They just are more focused on status quo, living a happy life, less ambitious both in value sets and career. So this group is always behind the curve as well. And you see these groups in almost all countries, except Brazil is, let's say, in this case, an openness, a very openness explorative country.
Well, thanks for this. I think this shows perfectly what you said at the beginning, that the difference between markets, there's a difference between markets, but the difference within a market is even stronger. Especially when you look, for example, China, the Netherlands, the US in this case.
Yes, and indeed, and we have this in many different variables. We have, let's say, hundreds of variables that we literally measured, and it's the same pattern that comes over again and again and again. And when we look at politics, we see this. We instantaneously feel it. We look at, I'll take American politics because everybody follows American politics. If you see what's happening, if you take Biden or the left flank, even Bernie Sanders of the Democratic Party, and you take the Republicans and you take the nativist or the populist flank of the party, you see these differences playing out. But these are the same people. They're the same consumers. They vote, but they also buy chocolate bars. They also go on vacation. They also download movies. So you see the same value pattern also in consumption behavior.
Thanks, Martin. One of the things we are so happy to share with you today is that we have now 2 cases in which we can show how we can use this information. And one is my favorite one. That's about Big Green Egg. And I think probably all of you know Big Green Egg, because that is that a big barbecue thing from the United States. And a few years ago, they approached us for the following. If you see in the United States that the Big Green Egg is one of the middle class barbecue apparatus, and they came to us with a very clear request. They want to come over the ocean and to open the market for them in Europe. But to be able to start it, the cost for bringing it to Europe, to market it in Europe, would increase the price. So they ask us, can you help us to define a target audience so that we can build a brand positioning, and we set a brand positioning and sustain it with an advertising campaign in such a way that we reach the right target audience, in such a way also that we can ask a premium price for it. So with that request, they came to us, and the Glocalities database is a perfect fundament for it to answer these questions. So Martin, I hand it over to you again to tell us how we did it and what came out of it.
Sure. Now I'm a personal big fan of the Big Green Egg myself, and in America it has a very cult-like following, and it's expensive in the US, but in Europe it's like really, really expensive. And we had to find a new target audience for them, and this is how we went about for it, looking at social cultural differences. Melis, would you mind?
Do you want the video?
No, the next slide. Sorry.
The next slide.
Yes.
Okay.
So here we do. So here the first. So we'll show you 2 cases. One case in which we used our standard segmentation because we already explained it, so it's didactically easier for us to continue and give the learnings. And the second one will go over into a custom-made segmentation based on values and social cultural differences. Now here we looked at 2 target audiences. We looked at the brand, we looked at who could be open to it, and then we looked at the higher income level of both the creatives and of the achievers. And we saw these are the ones that are more into cooking, into self-development, self-development culture on one hand, and the other more family-orientated, cooking-orientated, and slightly more showing off in a subtle way. So we found these would be the 2 natural target audiences. And we also quantified them in the markets there to see where we should focus on and in which markets we have. So these will be the 2 target audience. And then we can go to the next slide. And here we built a brand positioning. Now, if you look at that big red dot or triangle in the middle, is the people we serve. Those are outdoor-orientated achievers and creatives. So what we did is we recognized all the outdoor cookers that were achievers and creatives. We took all the values and social cultural aspects together, and we brought them together in one first, the brand positioning. Everybody loves to get to the campaigns in the end, but you need to get the positioning right the communication briefs right, and then you can work with the agency to get to the final results. So this is a bit how it looks like. Of course, we put the product truth in there and the functional benefits and what makes a brand different from the competition. It's all in there. And of course, the human truth is that we love to cook and we love to spoil the ones that we love, which is universal and actually goes beyond the achievers and the creatives. Next slide, please. So can we start the video?
I need to stop sharing now.
Yeah, no worries.
We'll start the presentation later on.
And I'll just take over the wording. So what you'll see in the video is how specific data points got translated into the brief and what the agency we did with. And then we'll show you the results of that as well after this. Yeah. I see there is no sound. Let me see if I can do this. One moment.
Time is measured by things that change.
Shall I share my screen?
Yes, please, Martin.
And come back again. By growing up, by the ones we see growing up. But some things never change.
So this is the campaign.
Time is measured by things that change. By trends that come and go and come back again. By growing up, by the ones we see growing up. But some things never change, like the song that's part of you your entire life, the home you keep coming back to, or being together with the ones you love. You know it's perfect, just the way it is. We are Big Green Egg, setting the standard since '74, staying true to who we are. Because some things never stay the same, but some things never change.
So what you see there in the campaign is the very specific data points in the brief. So the outdoor life that's appreciated by the creatives and the achievers, the art that's appreciated by the creatives and the achievers, and the high art, the fashion that's achieved by it, how it's important to look at how you are together with your family and with the different age groups that are there, which is less important for these two groups than for the other target audiences. So, and also how there is no glamour or glitz in it. So you don't see Rolexes, you don't see shiny brands, you don't see anything big. You just see something quintessential, the craftiness, the artisanalness that appeals to both the creatives and the achievers. You see the old cars from the 70s, you see the evergreen music, and those were all aspects that led into the brief. And based on that brief, we built this campaign, or the agency built this campaign. Now, also a very quick, if you could click again on the slide. I don't see the map. Can you go one slide back? Okay. Let me see if I can pull it up quickly here. Here's a slide. I'll share my screen if you don't mind.
Sure. Go ahead.
Do you all see the screen?
Yes.
The map?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is on one hand on how we built the communications. On the other hand, we prioritized the markets. So very numerically, we looked at the number of households, which is easy. The average size of the household, which is easy. Income per household, which is easy. But here it becomes more difficult. How large are the creatives in each market? How large are the achievers in each market? How many outdoor cooking lovers, barbecue fans do we have in each market? And based on that, we made a simple calculation of which market from the, let's say, the size of the prize argumentation is worth entering. Now, mind you, there are many other arguments to look at for the competition, the size of your sales force you have, the relations that you have. So there are many other aspects that govern your market entry and entry into a new culture and market. But the size of the prize is one that we can calculate in this manner. And Melis, if you could share your screen again for the next slide.
Martin, one final question before you give the results for Big Green Egg. I can also imagine that the media consumption is taken account into it. Do advertising agents use also the knowledge to pinpoint which media they are going to use?
Yes. Yes, they do. So channels do matter. The differences between channels and values is less strong, but it does matter. So you can imagine challengers, they are much more on the phones than conservatives, and very specific channels as well. And the more thematic the channels are, for instance, if you have an outdoor hiking channel, that will be very creative or achievement oriented. If you have a channel on Formula One, that will be very challenger oriented. So the type of channels, the theme of the channels is more important, but the message itself is, let's say, the biggest driver. That is where values and culture add the most insights, to get a tone of voice. And often, even if you don't put them here, the agency will come back to you and says, yes, but who is the person we're targeting to? I mean, what does the background look? Is it a male? Is it a female? Is it is he educated? Is he on vacation? Is he not? So more often than not, they'll come back, if they're a good agency, with questions of how the target audience should look at. And we should help them that. So we had a 20% increase in sales, a new positioning on the European market, which was much more luxury oriented. Now, also here, mind you, normally I'm very much against having a different positioning on one market and on the other market. So this is in branding actually not done. But in this case, we just couldn't, because the prices were so much higher that we just could not go for the same target audience. And so we separated Europe out from the US, and we built a different, consistent brand positioning and target audiences. We had successful market entries into Switzerland, France, Germany, Belgium, and we trained all the distributors. So having a target audience is great. Having the values of the target audience is great. But like with anything, like with software, you need to get it into the organization. So we trained all the distributors. We actually trained the sales force of the distributors, so they know how to approach different target audiences. They know how to sell to them, what's important to them, which type of commercials to use, so you can empower them to use the same type of positioning. Otherwise, you get a cacophony, a chaos across your channels of what you communicate. Now, this is great for Mars and for McDonald's, and they can play with the brand and they can play with the salience of the brand. But if you're starting, you can't. You have to have consistency across the brand. And last up, we started putting in brand measurements for the European market, for the main market. It's also the Swiss market in here. And we actually saw a strong increase in brand awareness. Now, this brand awareness was across the board, but it was even more so with the target audiences, between the achievers and creatives, where we had a 5% target increase in brand awareness the last year alone.
Thank you, Martin. I think this example shows, from a current brand in one part of the world, in this case, the big Verheggen in the United States, who wants to come over to Europe. Our next case is one of my favorites, because it's the Flower Council of Holland. The Flower Council of Holland, for those who don't know it's a client of the sister company of Glocalities Motivation for many years. It's an association of growers, and the aim of the Flower Council of the Netherlands is to promote flowers and plants, putting them at the forefront of consumers' mind in different countries. So it is an association that gets from the growers money to improve the knowledge, to improve the awareness of Dutch flowers and plants across the world. And they came to us about 3 years ago, because they said, well, the amount of budget we have from the growers is diminishing. So we should come up with a campaign with only a limited amount of budget that has a big impact. Can you help us to give input for a campaign that delivers the message in various countries, and to help us to grow our market in France, in the UK, in Germany, and in Italy? So also help us with the input for the campaign, but also again help us to prioritize the markets where the biggest money is for the buck. Where is the greatest group of lovers who we can aim at, and what should be the message that we bring across? And again, Martin, over to you, because we have some remarkable results.
Super. Thanks for the introduction, Melis. And if you could click a couple of times. So here we built, we looked at the European market, and we built a segmentation. Now, there is always discussion between segmentation and target audience, if you see the more sharpened approach, but here we had limited budget. So we had to really focus on who should we target, which market and how. And what we saw here by looking at different social cultural aspects of value sites, but also how they are very specific in their domain and what means sector, how do they treat flowers, how do they treat plants, that we combine them together in a segmentation. We saw that one is you have the aesthetic explorer, so creative culture lovers who love exploration and innovation and enjoy decorating their homes with designed pieces and flowers. You have the status seekers, so they're similar to the challengers, fast-paced individualists with fascination for social status and trends and have an urge to impress. You can imagine they buy different types of flowers to impress. Think of more expensive flowers, more mainstream flowers. Caring conventionalists, so family-oriented traditionalists who value safety and etiquette, like to create a cozy home and love to take care of others. And the nature care, so eco-conscious believers who enjoy care and enjoy caring for their loved ones and plants. And then you will always have a group called the indifferent pragmatists. You always have a group that you want to say not worth targeting, but just a bycatch. If any sales you can get is great. They're very pragmatic orientated, very bargain orientated, and more difficult to sell. There's also difficult to reach. Now, based on this, we selected 3 target audiences and 2 key target audiences who to focus on, and where we thought this is where we can grow, this is where we can send a message to, and this is where we can reap the benefits. Next slide. And can you press, yeah?
Can you hear it?
Now, I think you've already guessed a little bit at which target audience we are focusing. The aesthetic explorers. You see the curiosity in there. You see the art coming in there, the creativeness, the progressiveness, the yoga, which is an actual data point in there as well. The cosmopolitanness, the open-minded. So all these aspects have fed in to the brief for the agency to focus on the aesthetic explorers. And another good way to look at it is, when you look at it this way, look at target audience, you see that 12% of our population is responsible for 25%, so a quarter of the flowers, the outdoor plants and the indoor plants sales. So it really makes sense to target this group, which is a quarter of your sales. And you also see how the culture plays a role in this and how the values and lifestyle play a role in this to making communication that really sticks and that the people like in this, or instead consumers like, to be exact. And now for the next slide with some of the results. Now we measured here through brand tracking. Also here we put a brand track in place, and we saw that consumers that saw the ad and were impressed by the ad were 3 times more likely to buy flowers than consumers that were not. Also, if it was translated through the sales on a European level, then you saw it was approximately 94 million euros in sales of flowers, another 190 million in indoor plants, and the outdoor plants is 108 million. Now, the commercial so was just for the UK market, but there were small adaptations for each market as well. But in general, it could be the aesthetic explorer in all the main markets that Pieter Paul mentioned. and that brought this additional sales for the Dutch Flower Council. And as you can expect, we're very happy with them as a customer, and we continue working with them. So,
yeah, Martin, this requires a close relationship between what we find as a researchers as insights and the advertising agency, because they have to translate what we find into, well, a commercial in those two examples you gave. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yes, that's a super good question. And to say the truth, that's not always easy. So sometimes this works better than in other cases. So what we do is we write a brief, but we need to have a very modern agency that understands how to work with numbers and values. So you have more traditional agencies that just do work based on instinct, and that's very difficult to work with. So we need to work together with a good agency, and preferably select the agency together, or that we work and then we write the brief and we give that to the agency. Now what happens, the next stage, the agency comes up with several versions of the narrative, of the story, and then we work together with the agency to make it happen. And sometimes if a good agency, they come up with some insights, say, that's exactly the creative, that's exactly the careerist, or that's exactly the aesthetic explorers. And we didn't think of it ourselves because I think it's very fitting. So this can go from very good to more difficult. But I think this is part of working with agencies in general. And then the trick is to not only write the brief properly, but also look at what the agency come back with.
Okay, clear so far. Thank you for this. Well, I think that what we showed you during this in these two examples, I think one of the elements, the key elements of what Glocalities can do, that you know, brands who are operating in one country, or the association like the Dutch Flower Council in the Netherlands, when they want to expand their business internationally, they have to separate out the culture specific from the universal. Of course, you know, barbecuing is universal, but to be effective with their positioning in Europe, they should be taking care of the cultural specific aspects of Europe in this case. And the same went for the example of the Dutch Flower Council. So we look specifically at cultures and values. So first the big picture, and then zooming in on different target audiences. And analyze also the trends. And based on that, we can build target audiences across markets. But I think one of the things we many times we say, and in those two examples we all also did it, that, you know, the translation from the inside, as Martin was saying, to the actual communication, there is also, that's the proof of the pudding. So we advise our relations always to test it, because the local tone of voice is easy to get wrong. I think many of us will remember the Fiat Punto in Spain, which was not the best name for them to make use of that name. And it is just of those common mistakes which easily can be made. And what we can overcome with making use of cultural knowledge. So I think that's it for the moment for us. We're happy to answer your questions or your thoughts about what we presented. So please, the floor is yours.